Hey, welcome back to Slow Bells. Today I'm in Peterborough, Ontario, on the Trent Severn Waterway. Yesterday, my shipmates Tim and Janet started the long journey back to Seattle, which is where they live, and my next crew person, Bob, should show up later today, in theory. I'm only I think about 20% through the Trent Severn Waterway, but this video is also already getting so long that I thought I might break it up into a couple shorter segments so not quite so many of you go to sleep before the end of the video. And towards the end of this video, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents worth on the subject of boat cards, which I found pretty useful. You can make your own conclusions, I guess. Check it out. If you're a boater, there is more than one way to start the trip from Syracuse, New York to Chicago, Illinois. The way I did it was to take the Oswego Canal north to Oswego, New York, which is on the southern shoreline of Lake Ontario. From there, we went north to Kingston, Ontario, then west to Trenton, Ontario, and then northwest on the Trent Severn Waterway to Georgian Bay, which is part of Lake Huron. One place I did not visit is the Thousand Islands area east of Kingston. I managed a glimpse of a few of these islands from the deck of a tour boat operating out of Kingston. They were really beautiful little islands connected with narrow, twisty channels and a plentiful supply of rock along the shoreline that looked genuinely uncompromising. But I never took my boat there. Maybe this kind of hindsight is an argument for doing the loop more than once. Also, for what it's worth, you can get to the beginning of the Trent Severn Waterway by using the Murray Canal, which is southwest of Trenton. I almost visited the Murray Canal by mistake. After we spent a day rolling across Lake Ontario and fighting off nasty little biting flies, we arrived in Kingston, Ontario, where we checked in with the Canadian Customs Office by phone. My Verizon cell phone was not working well at the time, so we ended up using Janet's phone to talk to Customs. As you can see from this weather board, the level of Lake Ontario at the time of our visit in 2019 was roughly 3 feet above its normal level. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I spent a few hours on a tour boat in order to get a glimpse of the Thousand Islands area, which is very popular with people on the Great Loop. It was very obvious that many landowners had not planned on their lake rising 3 feet.
Today, most of these islands are closely held and cherished by families that have owned them for generations. Because drinking water is not a problem here. Most islanders draw their water directly from the sea.
After a few days in Kingston, we headed toward the city of Trenton at the southeastern end of the Trent Severn Waterway.
Charlie Sid, gonna get worse. Whoa!
It was on our approach to Trenton that I made one of my more impressive navigational blunders. As you approach Trenton from the east, you need to make a couple gentle turns to the right. But I made the mistake of going straight down the channel in this area. If I had gone far enough, I would have passed through the Murray Canal back into Lake Ontario. Fortunately, I caught my mistake after a few minutes and got back on course. It was a classic case of the navigator getting so immersed in the details that he lost sight of the big picture. Despite the shortcomings of our ship's navigator, we eventually reached Trenton. The marina there was unusually nice, and we stayed there a few days. I took a long walk to lock number 1, where I purchased one permit that allowed me to pass through the Trent Severn locks one way, and a second permit that allowed me to tie my boat up for free at docks inside Canadian parks. The total cost for both of these permits for my 38-foot boat was about $500. It was an expensive walk. There were a few other interesting things in Trenton that caught my eye. One was this sign, which I guess helps you decide whether the ice is thick enough in the winter months for a game of hockey. In the same lagoon as that sign, there was another sign that advertised a water ski jump. But instead of being pulled by a boat, you were pulled by a rope attached to an overhead cable, similar to a snow ski rope tow. Although this sounded like a novel idea, there were no customers signing up for the ski jump on the day I visited. The lagoon was heavily covered with plant growth. Speaking of plant growth, the plant growth in the water was thick enough for the marina to hire this boat to harvest the excess growth on a daily basis. The day I purchased my Canadian boating permits, lock number 1 looked like this, which is pretty normal. But the next day, when slow bells approached the lock, the water level on the upstream side of the lock had risen to a point where it was higher than the lock gates, and the water was pouring over the lock gates like a waterfall. We were able to lock through without any problems, but I must admit it was a little intimidating. It is common on the Trent Severn Waterway for the lock gates to be opened and closed using people power. However, the really high locks use powerful machinery to open and close the lock gates. Also, on our first day in the Trent Severn Waterway, we were traveling with 2 other powerboats. The smaller boat had engine problems, and slow bells became a tugboat for a while, pulling the smaller boat through Lock 5 and up to Lock 6, where we tied up. It was fun getting to know the Canadian couple on the smaller boat, and they were eventually able to resolve their engine problems. As we approached the town of Campbellford a few days later, we got our first experience with a double lock. Here is how one of these double locks work. You go into the first chamber, they close the door, and up you go. But when the lock gate opens, all you can see in front of you is another lock. So you motor into lock chamber number 2, they close the gate behind you, and up you go again. When you get to the top, they open the gate, and you are ready to motor out of the double lock. It's a little like taking one elevator halfway up a tall building, then walking over to a different elevator to ride the rest of the way to the top of the building. We tied up at the city wall in Campbellford and ended up staying 3 days. It was a nice enough little town, and it was becoming warm enough in the afternoon that it was mighty nice to be hooked up to shore power so we could run the air conditioner. After our extended stay in Campbellford, we made it to Hastings, where we spent one night tied up to the city bulkhead. Some rain was passing through the area, and we were not motivated to move further down the waterway. There was no electricity at the city bulkhead, but there was no tie-up charge either. On a sunny Sunday, we passed through Rice Lake and then back into more restricted waters. We stopped briefly in Campbelltown to pick up Dennis, who went to college with Tim way back when. Dennis remained on board for the rest of the day until we eventually reached the city of Peterborough, where we tied up at the Peterborough Marina for a few days. It was here that Tim and Janet left the boat with Dennis on a Sunday afternoon, and my new shipmate, Bob, would join me the next day. These are boat cards and are very similar to business cards. Boat cards are often exchanged when one boater meets another boater. Boat cards are infinitely more practical than trying to scribble down the information from your new boating friend on the back of your hand. I wasn't sure how practical boat cards would be in actual practice when I ordered mine, but experience has shown me that they are both popular and practical in the looper community, even with someone as socially challenged as I tend to be. The information put on these boat cards will vary from one boater to another. My boat card is pretty bare bones. Just my name, email address, boat name, and a picture of my boat. Other boat cards go into a lot more detail with stuff like telephone numbers and the web address of their looper blog. Some boat cards have so much information on them that they have to use both sides of the card to fit it all in. I have noticed that for whatever reason, I am much more likely to remember a boat's name than I am the name of the captain and crew. So, at a bare minimum, include the name of your boat on your boat card, and, if at all possible, a picture of your boat. If you can't decide whether to put your picture or your boat's picture on the card, this may be a good excuse to have a boat card that has pictures and data on both sides of the boat card. The amount of personal information that you choose to publish about yourself will be a judgment call that only you can make. There are several places on the internet that will allow you to design your own boat card online, including both pictures and text. If this is too intimidating to do on your own on the internet, I would think that your neighborhood print shop or your grandchildren would probably be able to help you out. One last thing to ponder about boat cards is what to do with all the boat cards you collect from your new boating friends. I suppose one way would be to take a photo of the boat card and store the photos on your cell phone in some special boat cards folder. A more rigorous method would be to transfer the boat card information to an electronic spreadsheet. Frankly, the spreadsheet thing is what I originally intended to do, but I found this approach had a couple drawbacks. For one thing, it was a little too time-consuming. Perhaps more importantly, every time I wanted to refer to my boat card spreadsheet, I had to drag out my laptop. My eventual solution was to just enter a couple items of information from each boat card into a text file on my cell phone and arrange the entries alphabetically by boat name. So far, that is proving to be a pretty practical technique. If I see a boat that I think I may have seen in the past, I just whip out my cell phone and scroll down my boat cards file. I still keep the original paper boat cards in a Ziploc bag in a drawer in my cabin. So, before you start your loop trip, think about having a bunch of boat cards printed up for you and your boat. They may disappear quicker than you expect. That's about all I've got for you today on this episode of the Slow Bells Journey. Next time we will continue through the Trent Severn Waterway, and maybe you'll get a look at some of the more unique locks along this waterway. And as I understand it, there is more than one of those suckers. Until then, later.
So Tim, what does it mean when the water comes through the wall?